Hi everyone, my name is Lisa Roberts and I help run the North Andover Parent Resource Network. And we're doing something a little different from what we traditionally do. We traditionally will bring speakers into auditoriums or run discussion groups, but tonight we're doing a roundtable with some local people. We're going to talk about anxiety and depression and suicide. So we asked in advance if you could send in your questions, and we got a lot of them, which was great. And tonight we're going to talk about those questions. But to first back up, North Andover Parent Resource Network is a group run by parents that brings in speakers and holds discussion groups. And we have a website with a resource library. The website is www.naparentresourcenetwork.org. And if you pop on there, there's a lot of resources on there for a lot of the topics that we've discussed in the past, which includes ADHD, anxiety, eating disorders, cell phone use by teens, vaping, a lot. So pop on there, and some of the resources that we're going to talk about tonight will be on there as well. So you don't have to write those down right now. But to introduce our roundtable group, we have Tom DiStefano. He's a North Andover Public School counselor. We have Liz Moughan. She is from the Dirty Hands Project. And we have Arthur Williams. He's from the NAN Project. So we're going to just have a conversation about this, but we're going to first start with some introductions of who everyone is. So Tom, why don't you start us off about who you are?
Thank you for having me. So my name is Tom DiStefano. I work at North Andover Public Schools as an adjustment counselor. I've been in the district for 9 years. I currently work at North Andover High School. I started at Kittredge Elementary for 2 years. I've been licensed for about 20 years now. I started coming out of grad school working as a adjustment counselor at a residential home, working with kids in the DMH, DCF population. Did that for a while, transitioned, did some outpatient work, had my own practice. Then I got fortunate enough to get into North Andover Public Schools. I've been here since. My experience at the school, like I said, starting out has been working with the smaller children over at Kittredge Elementary and working with them around different coping strategies, way to manage in the classroom, things of that nature. Since coming to the high school, similar things, but bigger kids, bigger problems. So we kind of do similar things, but I work a lot around what we're going to be talking about tonight with social anxiety, depression, and some large issues, which we won't be talking about tonight. Things like that. That's
great.
Yeah.
I'm so glad to have you. Thank you. So Liz is from Dirty Hands. Why don't you say a few things about yourself?
Sure. Liz Moughan. I am a North Andover resident. I've been in town for 20 years. I'm a mother of 3. Jack is 25, Viv is 11, and Ty is forever 18. We lost Ty to suicide August 22nd, 2023. Like I said, he was 18. He was a week away from starting his freshman year at UMass Amherst. In response to losing Ty to suicide, my husband and I started Dirty Hands Project. And the focus of Dirty Hands Project is to increase awareness and education around anxiety, depression, with a focus on suicide. And we're just kind of getting started. Again, it's only been a year and a half, but we're really focused on bringing signs of suicide training to schools, community involvement, other activities, beautification. We have a mindfulness trail going at Essex High School. So really excited to be here. I know I have a few minutes to introduce myself, and as I was thinking about what I wanted to cover today, I am not a clinician. I want to be very clear about that. I am just a mom with hindsight, unfortunately. And just wanted to share kind of some of my wishes as I look back on our journey as a family with Ty's mental health illnesses. So again, Ty had anxiety, which led to some depression and suicidal ideation. At the time this all came to be, I had never even heard the term suicidal ideation. I lived kind of a very quote unquote lucky childhood where we were not impacted by mental illnesses. It wasn't something I knew much about, so we had to do a lot of education for ourselves on behalf of Ty. So again, just some wishes that, again, in hindsight, that I wish I was better about was is the age at which kids start to experience anxiety, depression, suicidal ideation. We first realized that Ty was struggling around the age of 12. And what I know now, I think if I was more educated, I would have even seen the signs sooner. I passed a lot off as going through puberty, adolescence. We had just had our youngest daughter. We had just moved. I kind of thought of every excuse except for mental illness. And that's something that, I definitely regret. And again, the reason I mention it is you look at these kids 10, 11, 12 years old, and they're babies, and you can't imagine that they're feeling the weight of these mental health illnesses. It's just hard to wrap your brain around, and just want to mention it because I want to encourage families that is the age that it can often happen. So don't pass it off as something else is going on. And I'm kind of going through this chronologically as it happened to Ty and then ultimately us, is what to do in a crisis. So, and I say it to everybody I talk to now, you know what to do if your child swallows something poisonous. You know what to do if there's a car accident, you call 911. I encourage everybody to know what to do when there is a mental health crisis, because you don't have time. You don't have time to do research. So there are a lot of resources available. I'm sure Tom will probably talk to them. You can call the behavioral helpline, which I think you might have on your site. If not, we'll make sure to get it on there. Yep. Another important resource is 988. Mm-hmm. What I want to mention about 988, again, just based on education that I didn't know, I thought 988 was like 911, where the fire trucks and the police are coming. That's not the case. You can call, you can talk about what your loved one is experiencing, what you're experiencing, and they'll help guide you through the situation, which I think is really important to know. Another piece is I wish I knew what to expect in a crisis. So when we realized that Ty needed additional help, we took him to a crisis clinic where he was placed in Section 12, which means we kind of lost our ability to be his parents at the time. It was up to the state to determine how they were going to support him. And I don't say any of this to deter people from getting help. Mm-hmm. I just wish I knew what to expect so that I could have supported Ty, because it was very scary. As soon as you're sectioned, you're taken by ambulance to an emergency room where you then sit and wait for an open bed at a mental health facility. Again, just it saved his life at the time. I fully believe that. But I just wish I knew what to expect so that I could have helped him. Another piece that I just wanted to talk quickly about was just kind of different treatments and medications. And I don't know if the other panelists are going to talk about this today, but I just kind of went on this. As soon as Ty went into inpatient, we just kind of got on this conveyor belt and accepted a lot. I wish we challenged a lot more. Mm-hmm. We found out later that there is a swab test, just requires saliva, that helps you determine the efficacy of certain medicines with your biological systems. There is ECT, there is TMS, there are these treatments that go beyond just therapy if it's needed. And again, we found out about a lot of this after the fact. I think Tom will probably touch on it, ways to just help kids to get back to school. Ty was inpatient for a while. Going back and having to explain why you were out for 2-3 months is very, very hard for someone without a mental health illness. Imagine what it's like to go back with anxiety, with depression, and everyone's like, why are you out? There are rumors, etc. So definitely work with your school. Find a Tom who's going to be your advocate. It's huge. And then the last thing is, and I'm only going to speak from my experience, not saying it's something that every family can do, but this gnaws on me. I wish I opened up communication with his friends. Mm-hmm. Kids are more likely to tell their friends when they're struggling, more so than a parent their therapist, school counselor, they're telling their friends, they're giving their friends signs. And I always kept Ty's struggles private, even with his best friends who were over my house every day. And they did the same. We both knew he was struggling, but we didn't talk about it. And right before Ty passed away, he told us, because we noticed he wasn't hanging out with his friends, and when we asked him about it, he said, we got in a huge fight, and we're just working through it, which it wasn't until after he passed away that I realized was a lie, and he was just pushing everyone away. And I just wish I had reached out to them and just kind of validated that with them, and at least proved to them that when they were worried about him, they could have come to me, that we understood, that we would accept it, that we would be understanding and get him the help that he needed. So, long introduction, but I just kind of wanted to get those things out from the beginning.
Those are great advice. So when we talked a few weeks ago, you also explained where the name Dirty Hands came from.
Yes.
And I love the story.
Yes.
So why don't you tell us that?
Sure. So the community was amazing when Ty passed away. They started a GoFundMe. And we had always said that we wanted to do something around mental health when Ty was struggling, because it is so isolating. It's so scary. You don't know where to turn. You don't know who accepts it, doesn't know how to help you. And so, but we always kept Ty's story private. So when we always thought we would be able to talk about it when he was on the other side. And unfortunately that wasn't the case. So we just wanted to do something really powerful with the money that was collected through the GoFundMe, and the first thing was we needed a name, right? Because that kicks off everything else, your 501c3 and everything. And my daughter at the time, who was 9, was like, let's just go through the alphabet and think of words that remind you of Ty. So we went through, we still have it on our chalkboard. And Ty went to Essex Tech. He was in the Arbor program, and he was always happiest when his hands were dirty. When he was working on a motor or cutting down a tree or just building a table, he was just always tinkering and working with his hands. He was so talented. And so for D, it was dirty, and for H, it was hands. And we all kind of took a break. We all went up to bed, and I said, I think it's dirty hands. And it was all about, there is a need for hope. Mm-hmm. But I was just so sick of the word hope, because I hoped every day and every night that Ty would get better, and he didn't. And I was like, we have to get our hands dirty. We have to get in and talk about things that people don't want to talk about. We have to share our stories and our vulnerabilities. And so that was kind of the double entendre about Dirty Hands. And one of the coolest parts that kind of took our breath away was we had sent the name off to a graphic designer to create the logo, and she came back and she highlighted the TY in dirty, and we didn't even realize that Ty's name was in the logo. So it was really cool. So, and then the trees he had started a tree company with his best friend Ryder called Dude's Tree Care, and that was their logo, and they were so proud of it, and we knew that needed to be included. And then the shaking of the hands, again, a lot of meaning about coming together and supporting each other, but it was taken directly from a picture of Ty and Ryder when they cut down their first tree together. So
that's such a great story.
Thank you for asking.
So Arthur Williams, Jr., you come to us from the NAN Project, which, why don't you explain a little bit of what the NAN Project does and about yourself, because you bring a great personal perspective to this.
I love the emphasis you put on my name. I was like, yeah, let me. Thank you, Liz, for sharing your story. That was really wonderful. And that actually kind of segues into what we do at the NAN Project. So the NAN Project was founded around 2016 by Derek Kavanaugh and his mom, and they had a daughter named Nan. They call her Nan, and she died by suicide soon after she went to college. And again, this kind of goes back to hindsight. So for them, they knew Nan had some things that they did not understand. She had to have things a certain way. She would flip out, when they weren't. She'd have a hard time going to school and moving through. And they found out, they took her to the doctor when she was 9, and they were like, and the doctor was like, it's a phase, it's nothing. At 14, found out it was OCD and like anxiety and depression. And, excuse me, and, Nan was very upset about that. She was angry. She didn't want anything to do with medication, anything to do with therapy. She didn't really be different in that way. 10 years ago and before, like the conversation around mental health was very different. But she was with her family and had a support system and had friends. So graduated high school, had B's. She won the Spirit Award when she graduated. She got into college. Great. But when she got to college, without all that support system and with all that distance, she began to isolate and eventually ended up dying by suicide. So in response to that, they did something very strong. And they said, we want to go around and start educating people about this. And they felt that the best way to do that was to go to schools. We do trainings for like parents and teachers. More often, we talk to classes in schools because your friends are more likely to, or their friends are more likely to see something wrong with their friend and bring that to the attention of like, a counselor, someone like Tom, or help them to get to that place, advocate for them in some way, things like that. And so there's a little suicide prevention in that. Doing some work to like normalize even more the conversation around it. It's still not where it could be, I feel, anyway, in my opinion. And right now I think we're definitely in 80 schools, above, maybe close to 85. We have some wonderful, I'm a peer mentor, so they call me. I go and I share my story to other classes and stuff. We do presentations in that way. So there's a lot of us peer mentors. We're always looking for people. There's so many more of us than we tend to think. Whether you've had it for a little bit or you live with it, there's people with a story. But we have some really great peer mentors, peer coordinators. Derek, or we call him Jake, that's his nickname, because I think he's also a junior, actually. So to differentiate from his dad, they call him Jake. So that is where I come from with the NAN project. To answer your question, that's about the NAN project. It's wonderful, wonderful nonprofit. If you want us there, highly recommend it at your school. Okay, that's my shameless plug. We're gonna move on.
Tell us about yourself now.
Yeah, so as was stated, my name is Arthur Williams, Jr. Little icebreaker, okay. I like sports a lot. I like playing them more than watching them. Mm-hmm. So I do a bunch. I play basketball, play tennis, on a softball team with one of the schools that I used to work with, playing a flag football league. I'm also a huge sci-fi fantasy nerd. So I love reading about that stuff. I'm also trying to start a Dungeons & Dragons campaign. Tough, man. But it'll be worth it. Once I can get everybody to actually make their character, it'll be off and running. I also write poetry. I'm an award-winning poet in Boston. And so that has been, thank you, it's been a big part of my life, and it just ended up culminating into something really cool as I started writing about my experience as a neurodivergent person, or a person on the spectrum. Speaking of that, right, so I have a comorbidity, which means I have multiple diagnoses, and they kind of interact with each other. I have ADHD, and that's the neurodivergent part. I have bipolar 2 disorder, and I have generalized anxiety disorder. So as you might imagine, moving through life is a series of what's happening. But yeah, and so I guess I'm here in the capacity to talk specifically about my experiences with generalized anxiety disorder. I think I really want to focus in on coping skills, reframing how you think about mental health diagnoses in general, but focusing on generalized anxiety disorder. I think that's related to the stigma. Like, for example, we don't use the word take when we talk about suicide. There's a very negative connotation to that, right? try not to use wording that is like derogatory or down-putting in any way, right? Normalizing is the process of removing stigma. Try to do that. So I want to focus on that. Specifically, my experiences are doing everything without support, essentially. So I was diagnosed with generalized anxiety disorder when I was 19, diagnosed with bipolar disorder when I was 21, diagnosed with ADHD when I was around like the later half of 25. And that is a long time to go without understanding key parts of what's going on with you, especially for me, the ADHD, because I was born with that, and that was actually the greatest determinant of how I like move through life and my challenges. But when I was 23 and I was explaining my process, I just got a new psychiatrist. She had to stop me for a second and say, tell me something about my journey, which was you do not have the traditional supports of a person who deals with what you deal with. And that was, I never considered it, but it was important to recognize that. It gave me a new filter on like what I'm getting. So what it's like to be 18 and 19 and have to advocate to your family about taking medicine and considering inpatient. What it was like to like be in a culture that has no understanding of that at all. Or even like kind of moves it around. Like I had a lot of trouble with being Christian for a while because all my family just kept saying like, I don't see you in church that often. Like that's part of the problem, I think. I don't think are you praying? Have you been praying? And it's like, yeah, but it's like, it's more than that. So people just invalidating your experience or giving you things that, not willing to do the work to actually understand. So you have to do it yourself. So navigating healthcare because of that entirely, like being 19 to 20, what's a deductible, Where do I get it? How do I save money? Just so many things that you have to learn in a way that it's hard to achieve mastery when you are injured, right? How do you become an elite sprinter when your ankle is always rolled, right? And so because of that, I have a lot of insight into what happens, what it looks like, what you can expect, what you can do to help yourself, and that translates into what people can do to help you. Because essentially everything I did for myself was just something I, for the most part, something I needed or could have really used someone else to help me do. And that's where it's at. I think that's the really important thing about me and why I'm here, is that I hope to voice things in a way for people who are so actively interested in how can I help my child or even other people that they're watching this or listening to this, that that they get the information that they need so that those people that they care about are not left without the traditional supports people who have a mental health diagnosis like this would have.
You bring a great perspective, thank you. So we have a lot of questions that we can go through that people sent in. So Tom, we're going to start with you first. One of the questions that came in was there were a lot of different types of anxiety. Could you explain some of the more common types and what the typical treatment is?
Sure, and I appreciate bringing up generalized anxiety disorder. That's a large one I see. That's just ongoing excessive worry. I see that a lot at the high school with the kids I work with. Worrying from everything of going to the next class, what's the teacher think about them, what's the kids think about them, what they do after school, what's going to happen with sports, just ongoing, in really anything that kind of comes up through their day. Panic attacks and anxiety attacks are another thing I know we're going to touch a little bit more upon that. Social anxiety is obviously a big one that hits the high school. With social media, getting face-to-face with somebody in the classroom, getting up and giving a presentation, getting cold called on in class. These are all the things that I work on with kids in the high school and pretty common. And then, a little bit of phobias I don't see too much, but that is another type of anxiety. I think in regards to treatment, cognitive behavioral therapy is something that I enjoy practicing with the students I work with, kind of looking at your thoughts, and if you can kind of manage your thoughts, then you can start kind of managing your emotions. Medication, of course, go to your prescriber, doctor, have those conversations. Those are obviously extremely helpful as well. Lifestyle changes. What's my life look like? Where can I cut this out or add this to it? Nutrition, exercise, things like that, that can also assist you quite a bit with managing your anxiety. The biggest thing though, and Liz talked about it a little bit, is just find someone you can talk to. If it's a friend, if it's a teacher, if it's a coach, if it's someone at your church, start having those conversations with your child. I know we'll get in a discussion a little bit about that later, but opening that door, seeing if counseling, professional support's right for your child, and starting that dialogue, I think is a great way to break down that barrier.
So one question parents might have right now listening to you is, what is the difference between a kid being nervous or actually having anxiety? Because I can think of some parents out there thinking their daughter has a presentation that morning and, oh, they're nervous. Is it anxiety? Is that just nerves? What is that line?
Yep, I have a couple children of my own, a couple teenagers, and I can certainly relate to that with them when they're about to take a test. I think the big difference then is how much does it impact them? Is it something small, like just a little bit of worry that they can get through a test, or is it really affecting them? Is it affecting their sleep? Is it affecting what they're eating? Is it affecting their behaviors? You're noticing these larger signs than just, Dad, I'm nervous about this math test I'm going to take today. All right, you give a little pep talk to your kid. They typically get through it. It's those times where they really can't, and they start isolating and really tanking, where that might be something to start looking into and exploring, having that conversation. I always encourage the kids I work with at the high school, talk to your pediatrician. There's a yearly physical that comes up every year. I always ask them, when's your yearly? Is it coming up? And then I'll encourage them to talk. I talk to parents, talk to other counselors at the school. What are you guys seeing? But typically, if you're noticing other signs, it comes along. And then now we have maybe a larger issue. And if you can catch it early, the treatment's there. It's a lot easier to treat when they're younger than when they get older. And then we'll get into adolescence and puberty and things like that with anxiety. But
great. All right, so Arthur, you touched upon anxiety and panic disorders earlier when we were having a conversation. What is the difference between those two? And further explain the difference between, well, I just asked that, the difference between anxiety attack and a panic attack. I clearly have it typed twice here. So could you dive into that?
I applaud you. This is it's more than I would have done. And it's legible, which is more than my handwriting would have been. So appreciate that. So I'll actually start with the second question and then move to the first. Okay. So anxiety attack is something that actually doesn't happen in the moment. It's something that happens over a long period of time. Tom talked about it affecting behaviors like sleep and this and that. But it is that, and it is generally related to one or multiple things. Essentially, it's like a kind of extended freeze response where you're becoming very overwhelmed. It's making it hard for you to, making it hard for you to eat, hard for you to sleep, hard for you to focus. Sometimes related to the signs that we attribute to depression. But it can actually help make you slide into depression because you're not doing the things that you're supposed to do or that you feel you should, not living up to your own expectations, feeling like you're becoming a burden, etc. Things like that, guilt, shame. So they kind of go hand in hand in that way. But that's an anxiety attack. You can have an anxiety attack for a month, right? And just not resolve itself. It just hangs over you. A panic attack is something that happens in the moment. And a panic attack looks like, a lot of times, this person is they're falling out. They're screaming or they really can't breathe. That's a big one. And it's psychosomatic. Their breathing is fine. Their bodily vital functions, everything are fine. But for them, it feels like they can't get their breath and it looks like that. Often accompanied by the idea that you are dying. So literally you feel like, oh my gosh, I am dying, I can't make it. And you'll have because it's a fight or flight response, so chills, and then feeling like you're having a fever, sweating, GI upset. All of these symptoms or a mix of these symptoms can happen with a panic disorder or a panic attack, right? So people with an anxiety disorder can have a panic attack. And so I feel like that can be the big misconception people with an anxiety disorder are generally having an anxiety attack. It's characterized by frequent, long periods of anxiety that affects the life. A panic disorder is, my understanding of it, I'm also not a clinician, but my understanding of it is it's characterized by frequent panic attacks. So you might not have like an anxiety disorder all the time, like an anxiety attack, excuse me, all the time, but you will regularly have panic attacks and those have experienced those symptoms that I mentioned about what a panic attack is. And then that is a panic disorder. And so I think that answers the question.
It really does. And I remember we talked about Ted Lasso because I just watched the series and it was great. I think everyone got to see what a panic attack, that was a panic attack, right? Was.
Right.
I mean, he would clench up, couldn't breathe well. So that show really brought that to light, which was great. So, and you explained it to me earlier too, what the difference was, because I was using them the wrong way. So thank you. So Tom, what are the common and sometimes uncommon or misread symptoms of anxiety? For example, being diagnosed with one thing only to learn it was actually anxiety.
Right, I think, ADHD can come into that. When you look at concentration, things like that, especially trouble sleeping, that we can look at that as anything other than the anxiety. But I think what accompanies the anxiety is the cognitive piece too, the excessive worry, the restlessness, not relaxing, difficulty making decisions, and then the physical piece that Arthur touched upon as well. And the behavioral, irritability, maybe someone's starting to use substances that they didn't use before. Things like that. So those typically are accompanied with the anxiety disorder. I think you also, sitting with a professional, getting the diagnosis around depression, can look like that, withdrawal, socially. It could be that they're anxious, it could be that they're depressed. So there's lots of different signs and symptoms that come with each diagnosis, and sitting with the professional and getting that really sorted out is an effective strategy to begin with.
Liz, do you think there's anything you could add as it relates to depression in here?
Absolutely, and I think, and I alluded to it before, what was really hard for us was the timing that Ty's anxiety and depression happened, which was, like I said, the moving, the baby, the adolescence, the puberty, and even through 18, it was really hard. Is this just teen angst? Is he just tired? Like I do not have a mental health illness, but I was super cranky teenager and I slept a lot and didn't really listen to my parents. And so it was very hard to kind of determine, was it depression or was this just natural kind of the phase that he was going through? I will say again, in hindsight, there were definitely some signs. I think Arthur and Tom both spoke to it. For Ty, it was the shaking of the knee. And now again, that I've work with Dirty Hands Project, doing a lot of education, and that's a big one, just being unable to calm his nerves, lots of knee shaking, non-healthy relationships with food, lack of exercise. These were some common ones. And I guess what I would say is, and I always struggled with this, and I was very candid in my conversations with Ty, and I would always say, I am not trained in this. This is not my profession. I have no experience with this. I need to talk to someone who does know. And so my advice is, if you're wondering, is this just my kid being a teenager or going through something, or is it something larger? Talk to someone who knows. Like Tom said, talk to your pediatrician. I remember going in once to the annual checkup, and they have that little, is this happening? Is this happening? And I literally checked off every single box. I can't remember right now, but I just remember being like, oh God, there's something wrong, trouble concentrating, really messy room, things like that. Sometimes I did say, well, maybe it's not this bad, because he didn't have substance abuse. He wasn't reckless. He wasn't having major outbursts, which is kind of a common misconception that I had. That's kind of how I pictured it. I didn't picture it as more of these kind of subtle symptoms. So again, I would just talk to someone who can diagnose. Don't put the onus on yourself as a parent or a loved one.
So, thinking about how parents can help take care of themselves, did you ever turn to a therapist for yourself before to help sort things out in your brain to figure out, oh, there's something going on?
I should have added that to my hindsight list. I did not. When I struggle with things, again, I don't have a mental health illness, but just personally, my personality, I tend to go very inward. So I did not talk to anybody about it. A few of my very close friends knew. I don't think anyone knew to the extent that it was. And I wish I had. I wish I talked to someone. I wish I talked to someone that could have helped me better manage Ty. Because that, I think, would, as much as we showed him we cared and we were trying, I wish I just got a little bit more tactical in the skills that I could have helped him with.
Thank you. Good. Arthur, what is the best way for a parent to approach their child for a discussion about the topic of anxiety?
That's a really great question. One sec. When I get nervous, I can talk a lot. That's also the ADHD thing too. So I tend to put myself on like a lap timer when I'm in conversation. So that's what the watch is for. Okay, so I try to keep it shorter.
Well, that's great, because I still have to ask you about your fidget, and we'll touch upon that at some point.
Okay, cool.
Because you have some great pieces that help.
They are great. So, again, great question. One thing that I had a hard time with when trying to talk to my parents about this, because it's not like they weren't worried about me. I was showing things outwardly that they were worried about. It just never translated to, I'm worried about your mental health. It translated to, I'm worried about your future. So my dad got like hyper fixated on, I wouldn't say hyper fixated, but very fixated on me in school, having trouble with grades and things like that, I could understand that, right? He was so worried about my future that he would, very young, he would ask me things like, I'd come back with a bad grade or a bad score on a test, and he'll be like, you really got to get it together. What would you do if I died tomorrow? How prepared are you for life, right? Now, funnily enough, when you only train your kids to be good at school, they're not at all prepared for life. But that was his, that was his thing, among other things, and I get it. I get why he was like that. When I took the SAT, I tested in the 98th percentile.
Wow.
Right? I won scholarships off of that. That got me a full ride to a state college. I was varsity in 3 sports. I was the vice president of my choral club. I was in a quartet. I was in a musical my last year in school. I was in a couple clubs, right? So like I get it, where he's like, you could be doing so much. I don't understand why you're graduating with a 2.7, right? But in the end, he could not separate his fear from our conversation. And I just wanted to bring that up. Like, your kids are gonna have ups and downs, whether they have a thing or not, like a mental health diagnosis. But one thing I really wish is that I could have a conversation where I was not also taking on my parents' fears.
Great
while
point.
trying to deal with my own. So that was one, to have like a solid conversation. The other thing I would say is, in the same vein of separating your fear from the conversation, you have to separate the thing from your child, right? Because what's happening is outward and inward, right? In the same way, if someone breaks their leg, you can see that they're limping and then you need a crutch or whatever, but also on the inside, their body is doing a ton of things to help heal that, right? Same with any mental health diagnosis. With anxiety, there's a lot of rumination and things that are happening. The brain is working a lot. So separate as much as possible that from who your kid is, right? Who you know them to be, who they want to be. Because especially if they're active and having a conversation with you, they are working towards a better version of themselves that they know is in there, but are not able to access because of what they're dealing with. And I would say the last thing is to similar to what Liz was talking about, hindsight is 20/20. So do your best to educate yourself a bit before you actually speak with them.
Mm-hmm.
If you're worried about anxiety, call 988 or speak to a specialist and see what it is. Do a survey, or even do a survey with your child just to get a sense of what they might be going through. Ask them about their experience. Don't just say, accusatory, oh, you're not doing X, Y, and Z. Just kind of mention like, hey, I noticed this, and that, and what's up with that? So I didn't notice that. Don't go like, how are you doing? How was school? Because they'll just say, good, fine.
Mm-hmm.
Say, hey, what's up? I noticed some things. Can you talk to me a little bit about that? They might not, okay? But just the fact that they want is information, and you could also turn them to like a stranger or someone they trust that they might be more likely to talk to.
Mm-hmm.
And if they are, just listen, right? Just hear them out, no judgment, and then work towards some resources that will help them.
And the great point that Liz made was, if you call 988, fire trucks are not going to come, ambulance is not going to come. They can help answer those questions.
Absolutely.
Because you have a valid concern.
Absolutely.
So.
Call 988. There are intake centers in various places. Like I forgot exactly what they're called, I'm sorry, but they're free. You can walk in.
Mm-hmm.
There are resources that are like language relevant. So they speak Spanish or they speak certain English, Asian languages,
Mm-hmm.
so that parents who might be might not be strong in the language can talk about that. There's a thing called Hey Sam, which it's 9 through 5, and kids can text other kids, like teens, that are trained to help. Yeah, they can ask some
Really?
questions.
How do they find that? Is that a website?
It's a resource, so they can look it up. Or your
We'll find the
parents can look.
resource and we'll
yes,
put it on
yes,
the
but
website.
it's a
Okay,
number.
great.
They do
Perfect.
text and call, but
All
you
right.
can text them. Yeah.
That's great. Do you have anything to add? Perfect. Okay. Liz, is anxiety and depression in teens more prevalent today than in the past in your eyes, or is there just more conversation about it today?
And Tom can probably add to this too. It's definitely growing, unfortunately. We were forced to deal with COVID and smartphones and social media. These kids are just growing up in a very stressful, demanding world these days. I do think the conversation is increasing. I forget the name of what it's called, like if you're going to buy a car and you see the car everywhere. So I don't know if I'm just hearing so much about depression and anxiety and suicide because it happened to our family. Once you look at a video on social media, now I'm being fed. My whole feed is around depression and anxiety, but unfortunately it is increasing. But maybe a small sliver of a silver lining is that the conversations are increasing as well.
What do you think, coming from being in the schools?
I think Liz is right on the money. I mean, you look at, I was fortunate enough for a while, like I mentioned earlier, to work at an elementary school.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of these younger kids with their anxieties, it's, they are getting the social, they're getting their tablets and their phones at a younger age, and there's certainly that pressure that's put on them, depending if the parent's regulating or not. But when you look at little kids, there's a lot of external worries. How's mom, how's dad, what's their safety? They worry about, is there a monster under the bed? They worry about bugs. And then as we get to the teenage years, a lot of it turns internally. Start looking at themselves. They'll look, developmental, of course, but the academic pressures that are on them.
That's huge.
There's a lot.
Mm-hmm.
The perfectionism that comes in, meeting deadlines, getting their grades up, the peer pressure, bullying. How do I compare to her? I got to be careful, saying the wrong thing in class, or that kid's going to make fun of me. And then, there's those lifestyle changes too that take place. Are they moving a lot? Are they going to a new school? Things like that can also become a factor. But I think the biggest thing with the teens now is the social media and that pressure they put on themselves, that pressure for others. That are they getting a like on Instagram, or what? They have a group of friends that are out doing stuff and they're not invited, and then that if they already have generalized anxiety, then they're already worrying about that to begin with. Now they're seeing it, and then it's really taken off and becomes problematic, and that can lead to those feelings of depression.
Yep.
that come into play as well.
And we did a whole thing a couple months ago about wait until 8th, where we brought someone in, well, it was all a webinar, but she talked about waiting until the end of 8th grade to give your child a cell phone, because once you give a cell phone, it's going to be a smartphone, and once you have a smartphone, you have social media, and enter in chaos, because then you get the comparisons, you get the postings. So is it your recommendation if a parent can wait until 8th, they should wait?
I do. I mean, I'll speak up on my own personal. I mean, I gave mine to my kids when they turned 13, so 6th grade, give or take, right around there. And it's a lot. There's a lot to navigate. We have rules, and then it's like the day-to-day stuff too. How much you're regulating it. Like life goes on. You're doing your own thing. You're driving around. You're cooking. You're working. You're going to sports, and you're trying to regulate them. And you kind of hope. I mean, I'm a clinician, so I'm looking at the signs a lot. You know, are they isolating in their room? Or are they just playing their video games with their friends? And it's a lot of extra stress on us parents. But I think the longer you can wait, in my opinion, the better. Then, you know, you have to kind of navigate your home life and that pressure that your own child's putting on you. Everyone else has phone. I'm the only kid in the class that doesn't have it. And that's a different conversation that can be difficult. But overall, I think for the mental health, it's important. And setting limits, still getting outside, doing things as a family, having dinner together as a family, things like that, just to check in to see how they're doing day to day. But I tend to wait.
Yeah, there was a movie. Oh God, it was a cartoon, and they were all sitting at the table having dinner. And I remember 10 seconds uninterrupted eye contact, and we joke about that at our table because everyone's so tempted to look at their phones, but we put them over there now so we can actually have a conversation and you're not interrupted, because they seem to eke in. So Tom, a lot of people have said once puberty hits, that's when they noticed maybe some signs of anxiety. Is that just a coincidental thing? Is it the hormones are wreaking havoc?
I think genetics isn't something that's talked a lot about. I mean, you know, you're predisposed to it. Does your parents have it? Do your grandparents have it? I think there's some flags, just like with anything. Addiction, for example, you know, you want to see if there, you know, people in your family has had that, and that you could be predisposed. You know, you're predisposed to the anxiety. But those things I mentioned before, Lisa, with the hormones obviously kicking in and puberty, that's a huge piece. But like I mentioned before, the struggles are different than, you know, in elementary school. You've been in elementary schools, we all have. I mean, it's just this cohesive unit most of the time. Everyone's getting along. There's no major issues. Then all of a sudden, things change. And now they're looking inwards, like I talked about. And those pressures start occurring. You know, how do I look? How do I act? And that's just part of that's normal. It's just making sure, you know, that it's not coming to a place where it's excessive and there's an outlet and it's being talked about at home. I think it's important to have that communication with anybody.
And I think for teens, sometimes they think they're now looking to adulthood, and they're thinking being an adult means you solve your own problems, because look, mom and dad solve their own problems. But really, we lean on each other all the time, and they get that misconception of, oh, I have to solve this on my own. And I think it's our job to tell them, no, we're a team. Like your husband, your mate, your wife, you're a team. You work through this. And I talk to my friends, and I think that's an important message to send them too, that if you are struggling, talk about it, don't internalize it. So
there's a big difference between self-sufficiency and independence.
Yes. That's exactly, that's put very well, Arthur. So turning to you, how can parents help their teens cope with anxiety? Can they encourage self-management while also ensuring the child or teen feels supported? And you already talked to this a little bit. Is there anything else you want to add? Maybe this is a great time to talk about your fidget, because we all played with it and loved it and immediately calmed down with it. I think we all wish we had one.
Yeah, you know, you missed out. You got to prepare for these things. So I will actually pair this with two things. So I will talk about my fidget. So this is a roller. All right, I'm not going to say.
I think you need to hold it up a little bit so they can see it. Yep.
I don't know. Okay,
there you go.
Yeah, I'm not going to say the brand because they didn't sponsor this.
There you go.
Right, but that's a roller. I like to use this one because it's discreet. It's totally silent. I have a fidget on my ring here. It's a ring fidget. I use that when I don't have access to my larger fidgets, and I don't want to appear overly nervous. I do have a little bit of social anxiety. I have this one's small. 1 second. Here we go. I have a manipulative here. I don't know if you guys can see. Oh, there we go. Little manipulative that I like to use in my hands. It makes a little bit of noise, but it is cool for like when I'm doing homework or when I'm just like listening to something. I'm in a more relaxed, casual, area. And I have a bunch of others. I have ones that are super soft. I have a ball. I have stuff that clicks and makes noises, what have you. And the reason why I bring that up is because I can use these things because I have normalized it for at least my life, right? And I would say bringing these options to the kids, the fidgets are for self-soothing, right? So bringing these options to your kids is great, but it also does a greater thing, which is gives you the opportunity to normalize a lot of what's happening, to them, right? Sometimes you'll say, oh, you need a fidget. And it's like, no, they don't need a fidget. But if they want a fidget, that's great. In the same way, like people, they need to go for a walk, right? Mm-hmm. It's like, okay, you just need to calm down, step away from the thing, take 5 minutes. It's the same thing. You just need to do it in real time so you have a fidget, right? Same with deep breathing exercises, right? All that stuff. Sometimes it feels like work, right? Maintenance, which can be hard because it doesn't feel the same as with other people, except it is. Mm-hmm. People, sometimes we don't want to take a walk, but it's like, if I don't get up and move away from this, I'm never going to get it done. I'd love to just sit and be done with it, but I got to take a minute. Okay. So we normalize. I try to normalize. And I can normalize that in conversations. You kind of talk about these skills with your kids or talk about that with a therapist, right? Because they're the experts on it. When I sit down, I don't mention what I have because of stigma around it and because it gives people the wrong impression. I don't need pity. And I think most people who have these things don't actually need pity in the same way everybody else doesn't need pity. I can understand if you have pity, but I don't want to deal with your pity, right? I spent enough time with that myself. I'm over it. Or I just never had it to begin with. Some people are like that. They're like, no, okay, this is my thing, but we don't need that. So I don't talk about it, but I will say, hey, is it all right? I need to use this. Mm-hmm. It helps me focus, and I want to pay attention to you. Is that cool? They say, sure. Hey, I have a tendency to speak a little too much for too long. I'm going to put a timer on my watch. You'll see me look at my watch and fiddle with it every now and again. Is that okay? I'm letting you know, right? Sometimes I have a problem keep putting my thoughts together. I'm going to take a couple notes while you're talking. It just helps me keep my thoughts in order, make sure I'm getting the right thing from you. Is that okay? Because it's just about consent. That's really all normalization is. I need consent from them to be the person that I need to be the best person I can be for them.
Well said.
And talking about that with your kids is very, very helpful. And that relates to how they can encourage self-management and ensure they have support. So normalizing conversation ensures the support, right? As they adjust and change and feel different things, normalizing conversation with you or with other resources that you may be able to give them. We talked a bit about that, et cetera. Helps with the support part because support is other people. And the best way to get support is to be able to get it for yourself, but you need somebody to model that for you first. And that's with everything. It's with all kids. So if you're starting to see a byline here, is that a recognition that kids with mental health diagnoses are really just like other kids. They're just dealing with a different thing is very much it, yep. Right? And so, as a comparison, some kids don't have anxiety, but they have a hard home life, all right? But that's not that kid, and that's a thing they deal with. So the self-management part, very briefly, the thing that I do the most is reframing. So one thing I like is, I don't know who else has anxiety in the room, but I assume I'm the only one with anxiety in the room. But that also makes me the bravest person in the room. Mm-hmm. I knew going in that this was gonna be a problem for me. I'm gonna be very nervous. I'm gonna have moments. I'm gonna be thinking about that last thing I said and hope it wasn't as weird as I thought and never get the confirmation that it was. But that also makes me the bravest person in the room. And that idea of like, there are positives to this and finding those and leaning into your strengths and helping your kid identify that is important. Because we're not limited by our weaknesses. It's good to understand them. But you are limited by how intimate you are with your strengths. So that's what takes you further and farther. And I would say this mindset, which you can build over time yourself, you can read about it a little bit, but especially talking to a therapist, yourself and and your child, can be very helpful in regulating these thoughts and emotions in a way that filters what's happening in experiences for positive feedback and understandings of their life.
Well, Arthur, I'll say you're doing a great job.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
So speaking of support, Liz, can you talk about supporting kids with depression and suicidal thoughts? Looking back, were there things Ty said or did that you wish others had understood better? And I know we kind of visited this a little bit earlier,
Yes.
but is there anything else you want to reinforce?
Yes, and I will be, again, pretty vulnerable here and say that I did a lot of things really wrong. The first thing was not taking it seriously. So that's one of my biggest pieces of advice is to take it seriously. The other thing that I did wrong was I tried to talk him out of it. You have two parents that love you. We have this great house. We live in a great town. You have a brother and a sister, and you're talented and you're smart. And I just listed everything that he should be so thankful for, where other people had visible things, like Arthur said, divorced parents or poverty or something that's tangible. And I later learned that, again, it was probably the worst thing I could have done, because then he only had more guilt for feeling this way and it not being validated. When he went into inpatient, when he came out, he was filled with so much guilt because of the stories that a lot of these kids had. Incest, murder. I mean, the hardships that these kids are facing is unfathomable. Again, it was met with guilt. He couldn't understand why he felt this way, but he still did. So that would be another thing, is don't try to talk them out of it. Listen to them, validate their feelings. And then the final one, and this is really hard, and it's still hard for me, I still struggle doing it for my daughter, is being very direct with the question of, have you thought about killing yourself? Do you want to kill yourself? It is so hard to say those words to your baby, because you don't know how they're going to answer. And you're so afraid that you're going to put the idea in their head, and you're not. If they're thinking it, they've been thinking it. There's nothing you can say that is going to make it feel like a good or a bad idea. So just be very direct. They might actually appreciate how candid you're being. Mm-hmm. They know it's uncomfortable for you, and the fact that you're being so vulnerable might help them open up.
And something you talked about, validating, it doesn't necessarily mean that you agree. It means you're listening.
Just
and you're
listen.
Repeating it back. And something I learned about CBT, and you could probably talk to this, is the validation and statements, not the but statements. Because the second you say a but in a conversation, you now took away that validation you just said. So you validate, basically repeating it back to them, and then say, and this.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah,
Is that?
I've noticed, the judgmental use, I try to get out of those sentences. You're acting like this, you're being like this. I've noticed that this is happening. Can you talk a little bit more about that? What's going on in school? I've noticed I've noticed there's been a little bit of distance from the family lately. I've noticed sports aren't as important. What's going on? And then open up, have that dialogue with the open-ended questions. It's hard to be a mom or dad or a parent, and being a counselor, it's like they're there to work on a goal. They're there to work on their anxiety, their depression, whatever. Being a parent with your own kids, it's a lot harder to kind of sit down and have that, because, like I said earlier, life's happening. Like, there's things still buzzing, and you got to take that time, and be mindful to include that in your parenting, have those conversations. Stay calm, listen, don't judge. All easier said than done as a parent when things are going crazy in your home, but definitely things to be mindful of. And like Liz said, sometimes you just got to ask that tough question. It's extremely difficult to do, but if you're thinking it, ask it.
And practice it.
Yeah.
Right? Like,
Yeah.
I mean, I would go in the mirror and I would say it. I would talk to myself in the car. Because as genuine as you are, for me at least, fear always got the better of my tone. Excuse me. So I would be so sincere and so worried, but I was so scared
Yeah.
that it came across, sorry, as some anger.
I can tell you too, from my experience, you know, working at the high school, when I'm in a situation with students and we're talking, you know, they're disclosing some things, I'll ask them flat out, you know, are you having suicidal thoughts? Are you? And sometimes it's like, no, but then sometimes it's like, yeah, I am. And then you get them the support that they need, and you get them that assistance. I like the rating scales too. At school, I like the rating scales. You can use it anytime. Like on a 1 to 10, how are you feeling? Kind of gives me a good idea on, yeah, I'm a 10 with my anxiety. I'm feeling depressed. I'm a 3. Kind of gives me an idea, especially if you know the child, what that looks like with their behaviors. So scales are effective as well.
This leads in perfectly to a
I'm
mom
sorry.
directly had.
Sorry to interrupt. I don't know
sorry.
if we. No, it's okay. I don't know if we. I'm sorry if this was said, but was CBT? I know it's an acronym. Did we say
Oh,
the
the
whole
cognitive
thing?
behavioral therapy.
Yes.
Thank you.
Good
Yeah,
point.
just for the
Yeah.
people
Yes.
listening or who watching. So there's a lot of them, and we're all very, well versed. So I just wanted to throw that.
Thanks, sir.
Yeah. Thank
Yeah,
you.
do you actually want to get into what's?
I look at, for cognitive behavioral therapy, kind of like that 101 start. I kind of look at like a diamond where I have the situation that we're all in. So I like to use like amusement parks, right? You're going to amusement park, you're with your friend. So we got the situation, the environment's the amusement park. What's the mood you're in? Well, I'm happy, okay? What's the, what behaviors are you experiencing? How do you know you're happy? Well, I'm smiling, I'm laughing. And then the fourth is the thoughts. What thoughts am I having while I'm there? Well, I'm excited to go on this ride. School just got out. This is the best roller coaster is the amusement park. So I usually start there at something positive to give the kids I work with an idea of what CBT looks like. And then I'll take a more difficult situation, anxiety. I'm anxious about speaking up in front of the class. All right, so that's the situation. What mood are you experiencing? I'm experiencing stress, overwhelmed, anxiety. And then I kind of get an idea of which one's heavier percentage-wise. And then from there, how do you know you're anxious? And that kind of comes into those things we talked about earlier with the symptoms. Well, my knee's wiggly, I'm sweating, I'm having rapid thoughts. And then I get into the thoughts. So what's the thought? I'm going to look like an idiot in class. And I call that, I'm not making this up, but they call it the hot thought. What's the most emotionally charged thought you're having? And then I try, breaking it down. I tell them things aren't going to change over, one session just because it's clicked. You have to reframe all those automatic thoughts that are popping in your head. It's easy to do in a counseling session, but when you're in that situation and you're in that classroom and the teacher calls on you, to go back to what I just said is extremely tough. So what I always do is say, to start, is this a fact or an opinion? Most of the time, oh, it's a fact, I know I'm dumb. Well, no, it's really not. It's just an opinion. Then we kind of start from there, and I start teaching them some ways to manage the thinking a little bit.
That's interesting.
Yes.
That was a great point to make, because you're right. We all know what that means. So a mom directly asked, or dad, I'm not sure who sent this in, regarding that, what are some non-confrontational ways to approach topics of conversations, topics or observations of my anxious child that won't make him feel judged or feel like I'm disappointed in him, which we kind of touched upon, because these are often internalized as criticism. Therefore, he's very reluctant to talk about it or feels emotional when I've given him space and revisit it much later, which is a great idea, to give him space and revisit it. But what other ideas do you have for this person?
I share, if you can remember what it was like for being a teenager, and I'm willing to bet maybe this parent went through similar things with when they were younger, and pick a situation. If you can't think of one, kind of make, I imagine open-ended, like I talked about earlier. Find something that your teenager enjoys and connect with him or her that way. Going to the movies, throwing the football around, whatever that is. And then have that difficult conversation. Talk to the school, communicate with others. Say, hey, listen, how long, you know, ask a couple questions. How long have you been feeling this way? What do you need? What can I do to help? But, you know, it's hard not to be too pushy as a parent, but kind of step back and, like Liz was saying and Arthur was saying, listen. And if you can kind of give them that time, as parents, I think we always want to help right away, but give them a little bit of time to come to you and you know, hopefully work on a solution. And if things aren't getting better, you know, say you're going to need some support for yourself and look to get professional help. Talk to the pediatrician. I think annual physicals give us an ability, like I said earlier. It's how often, you know, and kids go in there and I know they're depressed or I know they're anxious. Like, you talking to your doctor about that? Your physical? Nope. It's just like out the door, everything's good. So take time, you know, talk about yourself and, you know.
That's a good point. Get the parent help too, because it's if they're concerned, they need to talk about it as well.
Can I add something briefly to that, if you have a moment? I think I want to aim this specifically towards men listening. All right. How often do you say "I feel" in these conversations, Tom, that you're having in the counseling service?
Oh man, a lot with counseling.
Yeah.
With the feelings come up a ton. Yeah.
And in your personal life?
Well, depends on the company I'm with.
Right.
But other men, not too often.
Not too often.
No.
Right. How often do you use action-based words? So when you talk about how you feel with other men, specifically. So like, you know, like, dude, like I could have punched the wall. Like, you know what I mean? Those kind of phrases. So like, how did you feel about that? Like when that happened? Oh man, I could have punched the wall. You know?
Yeah.
I could have do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Right. Or you'll say like, dude, I almost slammed my door. I was worried about the handle, type thing. Right. So this is a way that men are coded, right? We are actually not taught that skill of saying I feel blank because blank, and that makes me feel blank because it's more like, are you good, man? Yeah, I'm good. I just gotta go out and grind. I just gotta go figure it out, which is a very action, but I actually don't know how that guy feels, right? Let's say it's related to money. Oh man, I just like my car got hit, man. I got T-boned. Wasn't my fault, but the repair is like $500. Oh, you got that? I don't have that. So what are you gonna do? Like, you gonna do? But it's like, are you good? Are you okay? Do you need help? It's like, nah. I just gotta go work a few more hours, man, to make this money. When really what he wants to say is, I feel so frustrated because I've been taking good care of my car and someone ruined it, and I feel worried and angry that the only way I can think of, or that now I have to go work extra hours when I'm already like tired and this is a new thing that I have to work with. Those are two very different conversations. And so when you are talking about being non-confrontational, when you speak to your kid about anything but about anxiety, when they're already worried about so many things, bringing them and saying something like, why didn't you tell me? Or you can tell me anything, is not the same as saying, I feel concerned, or I feel, apologetic even, but, I feel blank because you did not tell me you were going through this. And I don't feel that you need to be guilty about that, whatever, but I do feel that I want to blank, right? So this thing where you're saying, I feel, instead of putting action on top of the kid is, to me, it's vital. I never had conversations
and
like that.
When I worked at elementary school and the great elementary school counselors that are here and working with these kids, giving, that's a big difference, giving them those tools and that language from kindergarten and up. So 100%. When they're up to the high school, hopefully they have it. And if not, it is a teaching point for sure to have. But
So, Arthur, some kids try something and fail the first time, and they're like, oh, I can do this again. But maybe a kid with anxiety struggles with that first attempt or second attempt and then feels beat down and needs to build that resistance to try it again and recognize that the first time the second time may not work, but the third time, that might be it. How do you recommend kids build resistance? Or resilience, sorry, wrong word, resilience.
I think both are applicable, but I think so this goes back to reframing. I think there's a very solid difference between having difficulty regulating anxiety and, you know, the pathology that comes with an anxiety disorder, and having low confidence, right? So confidence is something that you can attain, build, and nurture, right? It's a skill to actually have confidence. It's not something you're born with. Handling anxiety similarly, right, is a skill. It's not something you're born with. So when it comes to anxiety, really it's about how do I help my child not be overwhelmed with the task?
Exactly.
Because they actually did try it once. A person with anxiety might actually be more likely not to try it at all. Not because of a lack of confidence. Sometimes that can actually be the problem. They know they can do it. They know they can finish this project. They know they can get this homework, whatever it is. But something about it is causing them a huge amount of anxiety. It's affecting their behavior. It's causing avoidant behavior, which is like a vicious cycle with that. And so maybe they tried it once, and now they're not doing it again because of this thing. But that's not a lack of confidence. So when it comes to anxiety specifically, it's about bringing that monster and turn it into something smaller. Or, you know, not seeing a person as like this big thing. Oh, that's the cool girl. That's the, you know, everybody uses the bathroom, right? And so this is the thing to me with anxiety. Having higher confidence or building confidence and self-esteem does help with that. If you're talking about resiliency, because you can kind of use that bank, that vault of memories, those reasons, that evidence for the reason why you're confident, not just in this thing, but in anything. I'm confident in my ability to adapt at this thing. I've been doing this for a while, I know I can. Helps you take that, like, this is so overwhelming, and cut it down. The last thing is like just practices. You know, if they're anxious about a thing, it's probably the whole thing. Help them cut it down to small pieces and see how that goes.
Yep.
Maybe they're anxious about how long it'll take. Well, let's set up small pieces, reasonable goals, set a plan and a deadline. Maybe, you know, act as a little bit of a buddy for them. You can't always do that, but while they're with you in your home, if you have the space, great, you know, something like that can be very helpful. Because again, we're just modeling the skill set that will help them to be able to overcome this or work with it, however you want to look at it.
It works. I mean, I do it at the school. I see the kids make progress. I'm lucky enough to have a lot of the kids I work with for 4 years. So they come in as a freshman, you know, they have difficulty with social anxiety and self-advocating for themselves. That's a common goal we work on. And then by the time junior, senior year rolls in, they're asking a teacher alone for that extension on the test, or to, you know, stay after school with them, rather than I start out going with them, then they're doing emails independently, then they're going with a peer, whatever. And then we kind of gradually get to that point where they're doing it independently. And it is effective, but you got to find that starting point and not start too big with that anxiety. So
100%. And related to that, I think everybody has experienced this, where you're like, okay, I'm at point A and I need to get to point B. And you realize that your point A is way back here. Your point A is way farther, your actual point A is way farther from your expected point A.
Yep.
And you have to work towards, you know, sometimes there's a feeling of like you have to work until you can actually get started, but where you get started is where the work starts. And that could be the same with, you know, kids. They have an expectation of what they can do, and because of how we kind of grow up in the school system and in other systems, they have an expectation of what they should be able to do, right? When you get to X grade, you should be able to X thing in math and English and what have you, right? It's the same with social stuff, and it's the same with how you should be able to think about things. A lot of times those things are skewed for various reasons, media, what have you, right? But ultimately, the idea is, where did I start with this? I'm sorry, I got lost. I was saying, where did I start with that? I'm sorry.
A to B.
A to
And
B,
you have a
thank
longer
you,
way to
thank
get
you.
to
That's
A.
the ADHD. So, but ultimately, starting where your kid is at and acknowledging for them, like, it's okay wherever you're at. We're just trying to identify that first and then help you get to, you know, where you can be functional and then even start to thrive after that, because that's the goal.
Yeah, that's a great point. Liz, were there moments that helped Ty be seen or supported even during the hardest times? And as a follow-up, is there anything people did that helped support you? Could you suggest how parents can help other parents? And I know we touched upon this a little bit, but it's good to reinforce.
Sure. For Ty, his friends played a huge role in being seen and supported. They talked very openly about mental health. I know he was able to share things with them. They were able to share things with him. So that was huge, right? As a teen, your friends are your chosen family. So that was amazing, the way they supported him. At home, I really saw Ty open up more, and I forget if Tom or Arthur said it, when I stopped trying to solve it. I so desperately wanted to fix him. And when I would try to fix him, like, do this, do that, what if we do this, let's try that, he would shut down. When I just listened was when we had our most productive and very raw and vulnerable conversations. In terms of parents supporting other parents, and I always do get choked up, so I apologize, but since Ty's passing, everyone is always like, you're so strong, you're so strong. And I say to people every chance I can, the strongest I have ever been was the day we dropped him off at inpatient and had to walk out. That was the hardest thing we have ever done, and that is strength. And so if you know someone who their child is struggling, just talk to them about how strong they are and what great parents they are, and support them, and do what people did for us after Ty passed away. Do it while their kids are still alive. Make them a meal, send them flowers, ask them to go for a walk. Again, we weren't super open about our story, and that was really hard, and that's why we're doing Dirty Hands Project. The number of people in every aspect of my life, neighbors, friends, family, coworkers that have come to me and shared their story is absolutely amazing. And there isn't very much for us to be thankful for with our situation, but one thing I am thankful for is I have educated myself enough to sometimes get people on the right path, or who to call, or do the tough research that I was frozen. I was so scared I couldn't even research things because I was afraid of what I was going to find out. I was afraid I was going to see Ty's face when I read stories about depression and suicidal ideation. And so we're taking some of that onus off of people. And so again, if you know someone going through it, make the phone calls, help them figure out what mental health facilities they can get on into that don't have a huge wait list, or what resources in town they can leverage. So again, just put the effort in while the kid is still alive.
Yeah, that was great. And go for walks, because
Lots
you don't
of
have
walks.
to look at each other. You can just walk straight ahead
Lots of
and
walks.
do a lot of talking.
I bet Arthur too, mentoring, driving in the car with kids is always a great time to have a conversation.
I would say, interestingly, like yes, for two reasons. So one, there's at least my experience, there's something relaxing about the movement, right? You're going somewhere. It's because there's a destination, you know that an end has to happen, a transition, and that transition is we get out the car, right?
Yep.
And a lot of times conversations don't have that. You're sitting there and you're going, is this gonna be 5 minutes or is it gonna be an hour, right? And it's kind of rude and weird to set that expectation, like, hey, I'm only gonna talk to you for like 5 minutes, but I need you to like, right? Or it's like, I blocked out an hour for this, let's go. It's like a weird thing. The other piece is that cars are inherently intimate, right? You get in a car, it's you and them, and you notice, I'm blocked off from the whole world. It's something you don't necessarily notice in a home because it's so large, but you're seeing people move past you and cars move past you, and you're like, okay, it's really just us right now. I would say the last thing is you kind of are forced to listen and not say a lot because you're driving. You are looking at the road, you can't answer everything. You can't, so there's an economy of words that needs to happen. Because if you don't have the practice or a strong skill set and just being like, I'm gonna sit and listen attentively and not feel the need to jump in, and even if you do have that, it's your kid. And so you might be like, ha, 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 and that's totally understandable. Being in a car, if that's where you want to start, cool. Just again, don't start with, man, how was school? And they say good, and the conversation's over,
Yep.
right?
And no phones. Passenger seat, the job of the passenger is
Yeah.
to entertain the driver. This is what we always say. It's not always successful, but no phones, because that just takes it away.
You know, it's kind of like being in a car kind of equalizes that because you are also engaged in a thing. So it's like, hey, can you put down your phone for me when we're talking? Or you might get things out of them just because they're on their phone and talking. You know what I mean?
Doing the mindless thing.
Yeah, it's like do what works, right? But if you do have ways of speaking to your children that connotates like, and now we're having a crucial conversation, but we're having a critical conversation, but not a crucial conversation. Do that. That's kind of coded in every family, I think. And more so, the stronger your relationships are with your kids. But everybody, I think, does have that. So I consider a car neutral territory. I've gotten my younger cousins, my older cousins, my brothers to open up to me a little bit more on trips just because we're in the car and we're going somewhere.
That's true.
Yeah.
All right, so this is our final question. I know we've run really long, but I think this is an important conversation that we're having here. All right, so it's a long one, and it's specific, and I like this question especially because it means that we have parents with college-age kids asking us questions for NAPRN. So my college-age daughter was diagnosed with anxiety 4 years ago. She's been acting as a person who also has ADHD of late, and we know this is normal. In college, she has the following supports: a 504, which means more time, an executive function coach weekly, a mental health counselor monthly, and she's taking 20 milligrams a day of Prozac. So it's very
amazing.
specific.
That's so wonderful.
Is it working? This plan has been in place for about the last 5 months. What can we expect going forward? Can we ever expect to not need such supports? Can we expect this plan to stop working at some point? We just want to know what to expect. And I think this is a great question for the future, because I think a lot of parents wonder, once these kids are out of high school and they're away from those supports that you know, what happens? So, Tom, what do you think?
Yeah, I'll start, and everyone can jump in, please. I first kudos to this parent for getting everything set for their college-age
Right.
daughter.
Yeah.
You know, I imagine putting this work in, this focus in, this effort in over the years, so she is prepared for college to manage her anxiety and you know, hopefully everything's kind of working out. She's taking it's effective. I think, you know, she's an adult now. Letting her kind of lead from here would be my only advice. But I can't judge what this parent's doing for their daughter. I think it's wonderful, and they've definitely set this daughter for success on managing her mental health.
So just keep going forward and make sure.
Yeah, I think there's that conversation, that adult conversation starts coming. I don't have any college-age children, but you know that is appropriate to have that dialogue around what's next. It's working for her. She's enrolled in college. It's effective. She's in therapy monthly, which tells me maybe that's decreased to monthly. She's addressing her ADHD with a coach, so she's learning healthy strategies to do that. And it seems like it's working, and I don't think there's a time limit on it. You know, it's when she's ready. And those conversations happen with your therapist. Those conversations happen with your prescribers and other people that she's working with. Here's where I'm at. So.
Yep. And it's important that she advocates for herself.
Of course, yeah.
And at that age, she should be, and that's great practice for her. Do you guys have anything to add to that?
Yeah. So one on the, so I think this is great, the plan that's in place. But the reason why I think it's great is that a lot of the supports are about skill building, truly. Executive function coach. So they're gonna walk away with lessons and practice that they can apply. I need to do that myself. I didn't know that existed. Mental health counselor, right? So we're talking things through and we're learning the process of how do we think so that we can properly regulate what's happening, right? The 504 is actually a learning experience. I had that for a little bit. The idea that you need more time, right? So you have to go get more time to do certain things. And if you can like overcome that, so do executive function in a way that makes it so you don't need more time, great, but you might find that you always need a little more time because of how you function. Cool. And these are things that you can walk away with. I wanted to briefly also mention that can we ever expect not to need such supports? I'd say yes. There's always the possibility of that. I mentioned being diagnosed with ADHD when I was 25. The first day that I ever took my ADHD meds changed my whole life. It really was like, okay, and so I definitely do have this, right? It's not just the surveys, like, wow, like this is a thing. And I was in a really hard place. I was working 3 jobs. Soon after that, I had to leave my parents' house, just for a variety of reasons. Wasn't anything like, crazy. But I did end up homeless for a few months. I was living out of my car. We were trying to continue to save up for this condo, so there was a lot of stuff going on, okay. And I was like, I need my executive function to come together. Little context, people with ADHD that are undiagnosed and function very well, happens a lot, and then suddenly their life falls apart when they get a promotion and more responsibility, a new baby, and they're starting a family. Leads them to have a lot of problems, even like depression, because they suddenly find they can't handle the organizational requirements of this new thing that popped into their life. And that was me, way before that moment, but definitely in that time when I was 25. So I was on that medication for like 3 years, almost 4 years, and there came a point where I was like, oh, you know what, this is actually maybe not really working for me. I feel worse than I ever used to on this. And my therapist, my psychiatrist was like, we'll try some holiday days. And I felt better than ever on those, it was 1 week where I just didn't take it for 2 days. And how she expressed it to me was, I think you've outgrown your medicine. You don't need this anymore. You're functioning well enough that this is actually hindering you now because of the way it makes you feel. And that's why I'm big on building skills and having those coping mechanisms and having a personal system. Because yes, you definitely can end up in a point where you just don't need it. You might have it as like a backup or something, or you might let it go because, like in my case, it's poorly affecting you. But, you never know what will happen. And so work towards what you prefer, but just work towards stronger skill sets.
That was a great answer and a great ending to this. Do any of you have anything you want to add that we didn't touch upon that you think is important to mention?
Yeah. Is it all right if I take out my phone for a second? I wrote something down.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. If other people want to.
Yeah, well, I guess one thing I'll say while Arthur is doing that is, I think we expect a lot of our kids, and things that we've talked about today about being vulnerable and having we're wanting our kids to be vulnerable and come to us when they have issues and share their concerns, but I don't know if we expect the same of ourselves. Mm-hmm. Are we sharing with our kids when we're anxious? Are we sharing with our kids when we're depressed? Or are we putting on this front so that kids think, well, my parents never are anxious, they're never sad, how do I go to them? Is this going to be disappointing? So I would just challenge all the parents to kind of walk the walk, and not just expect kids to be vulnerable, but to be vulnerable themselves.
Great. Yep. Did you find your note?
I did find it. Okay. So recently I do my reflections, and I ended up on lessons that I've learned. All right. And there are some really hard lessons that I had to learn by myself, which is why they stuck out to me. So, sometimes the person that you're looking at isn't the person that you're looking for. It's hard to find that out when the person you're looking at is your parent, right? Sometimes where you are, we talked about this, is a far distance from where you need to be, or where you'd like to be to start something. Sometimes you plant the seed, but don't get to harvest the fruit of that, right? Sometimes systems aren't built against you, they just aren't built for you. That was true for me with every mental health diagnosis, especially with ADHD. And that was hard for me to separate as a person of color, given the history of our nation. Sometimes a loss is not a new beginning. That's also one too. And sometimes being inspired is not the same as being empowered. And so I bring those to say, how you frame those in your mind, how that informs you can be healthy, or it can be very negative. But one thing I found was, while these things can all be difficult, negative, and what have you, having people in your life that support you, that see you, that validate your experience can be the shining lights along the path of that when you have to come against some of the harder things about reality, especially as a young person, and know that it doesn't have to be this way. There's just instances where it is.
Yeah.
And I think that's what I wanted to leave in, honestly.
That's a great note for you to end on. Do you have?
Yeah, I appreciate you putting this together, just to have everyone's experience here in different ways with life and what we do, and people are trying to help, and to have this put together for a resource for the community and for everywhere, just to kind of share with our stories and ways to help children really to become, better functioning adults and understand themselves a little better. So I appreciate everyone here and sharing their experiences, and
Awesome.
thank you.
Wow, guys, this was amazing. This is better than I imagined. So thank you. And thank everyone for watching. And some of the resources that were mentioned here, I'm going to add onto the website. So again, and I think they're going to put it at the bottom of the screen, but just in case, it's www.naparentresourcenetwork.org. And thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.